everyone. Welcome back to another episode. I'm going to start us off with an introduction as always. So today we have someone I'm really excited to interview, and no one has written more on talent and leadership in the last 4 years than her. Her name is Roberta Matuson, and she's the president of Matuson Consulting and the author of her newly released book, Can We Talk? 7 Principles for Managing Difficult Conversations at Work. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Grateful to have you on. I think the topic of your book is crucial because I think in the workplace, and obviously, this is interviewing you, so I want to hear your thoughts. But if I had to guess, especially in a corporate workplace, there's these kind of like gray boundaries where it's sometimes could maybe be a little bit difficult to say, to decide whether to say something or not. So first question for you is, how did you get into this line of work? Like, what were you doing before the 6 books? You've written 6 books, just telling the audience that. What were you doing before? And then did you think you'd be doing anything like this, like your consulting company and writing these books?
Well, I've actually had my consulting company now for 25 years. Mm-hmm. And during that time, in the last 9 years, I've written 6 books. So did I ever think I would write a book? Absolutely not. Yeah. Did I ever think I'd write 6 books? No. Right. But, I get inspired and I look around and I do a lot of executive coaching, and everything that I always write about in any of my books is really based on my experience and the school of real life. And so, these past 2 years, they've been tough, right? And I wrote this book during the pandemic, which we're sort of still in, I think. And I'm kind of glad I did that during this time period, because a lot of the advice that I've written in the book in the past, I would have said, you want to have these conversations in person. And I would not have addressed any of those issues around how do you have a challenging conversation when you are not in the same room as someone. But now, that's just the way it is, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you need to have a difficult conversation with someone, that might be taking place nowadays over Zoom. Whereas in the past, I'd say, oh my gosh, if you have to do a performance improvement plan, like, don't do it on the phone. Yeah. So the environment's changing. The book is very timely and it's very relevant. And I wrote it because I noticed that there was a lot of things that need to be said that were not being said.
Got it. I understand. So let's go. So the consulting, I always like to kind of start from the beginning and then take it all the way. So not all the way to the beginning, right? But like before the consulting company though, like let's say maybe like high school, college time, like what were you thinking? What did you think you'd be doing? And then what instigated the consulting company even starting?
Well, early in my career, I majored in business and in human resource management. And when I came out of school, I went into HR and had a number of different roles. But at the age of 24, I was promoted into the executive suite. And as you can imagine, that presented a lot of challenges. Mm-hmm. And that is the premise for my first book, Suddenly in Charge. And that's all about managing up, managing down, succeeding all around. And so, so I was in HR for probably 20 years and then decided, I'm not sure I want to stay in this field. And when I was thinking about that, it just became crystal clear to me, it wasn't the field that I wanted to leave. I needed to leave the way I approached things. And so I decided, I got tired of my boss listening to all these consultants when I was the one who told him these things first. And so I just said, you know what, I'm going to be a consultant. And that's what I have done. I'm an advisor. I'm an advisor to those CEOs on matters on talent, and I'm an executive coach to those leaders.
Got it. Okay. And then what was to write that first book? How did you make that leap of faith to even just decide to write the book? Because I think the first one's the hardest. Like once you go through the experience once, writing a book is not easy, no matter if it's the first or sixth. But once you do it once, I think it's easier because you've gone through the process before. So how did you decide that? Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a yes and a no.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know when I went through the process. My agent told me, you do know, when I wrote the second book, she's like, you do know it's harder to get a second book deal than a first book deal.
Oh, okay.
And I was
Yeah.
like, no, I did not know that.
Yeah.
But I think it was my the first book that was published, Suddenly in Charge, that was not my first book proposal. My first book proposal was rejected by many people. And so I went back to the woman I wanted to represent me, and I said, okay, you were great, and you gave me a lot of great feedback when you rejected my book. Here, how about this one? What do you think? And her response was, now that's a book I can sell. And she did, and we've sold, oh my gosh, tons and tons of copies of that book. It's done incredibly well.
Yeah. So what was and I'm just curious, this is for the audience, like the first book, did the feedback she gave you, like why was that rejected and then yet the second one accepted? Like what was the main difference?
It was the topic, and it was my platform. And what the thing is that most people don't understand who want to write books and they try to get a commercially published book deal is that if you don't have a strong brand, if you don't have a strong platform, it's really hard for a publisher to believe that you'll be able to sell a certain number of books that will make it worth their while.
Mm-hmm. And did you ever consider like self-publishing or hybrid, or you just definitely wanted to go traditional?
No, I never considered it. And that's why I think I was able to get that deal, because there was no, well, if that doesn't work out, there was no plan B.
Yeah. That's interesting to actually talk about real quick. Like, what are your thoughts on plan Bs in general? Because if you don't have one, then normally you'll make plan A work out.
Yeah, for me, I'm not a plan B girl, but
Yeah.
and now that I know how much work it takes to get these books out there, like with your publisher, and I know what they do for you, I also know what they don't do for you. So I'm not under this illusion that, once it's written, they're going to do all these things to help promote it. I'm very clear. I know what's going to happen and what's not. But it is a lot of work to get these books out. And my hat's off to anyone who has the wherewithal and the patience and the money to self-publish, because it does take money.
Yeah.
And then you get it out there, and after you've sold copies to 100 of your friends, that's it. If you don't have that platform.
Definitely, yeah. You need a solid marketing plan. And then, so I want to get into the meat of the book, but just last question on this topic, your like experience with writing. So how did so you've done 6 books. So obviously you have a routine or something. So what works for you to successfully write a book?
It's called sign the contract.
Okay.
When you sign that contract, that's a legally binding contract. And you have a specific number of months to turn that manuscript in. And when you have that deadline, you'd be amazed how quickly you get things done, because you're like, okay, I'm on chapter 4 and the manuscript's due in 2 months. I got to get this done. And so I would write every day, pretty much, maybe take a day or 2 off, but every day for at least, an hour and a half. Just get it out there. And I don't self-edit my work. So it's easy to just get it out there and then go back and read it and say, does this make sense?
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So I want to get into the meat of the book now. So I think the best place to start is, because I'm sure this has happened with every employee, is say if an employee like wants a raise or wants to talk to their boss about something that might be uncomfortable, maybe another coworker did something they didn't like or whatever it could be. How would you suggest they address their boss in that scenario?
Well, I'm glad you brought that scenario up, because all these other books on difficult conversations that I've come across, they're really about if you're a manager and you have to have a conversation that's uncomfortable, But my book is not just for managers, it's for if you're an employee and you have to talk to a coworker or your boss. So in the scenario that you laid out, the first thing you need to do is be really clear. Like, what are my objectives? What do I want to see happen as a result of this conversation? What am I asking for? Is the timing right? Has my company just announced that they've lost $1 billion? Should I go in and ask for a raise right now?
Yeah.
Here's a clue, probably not.
Yeah.
But it's really about, for me, and what's interesting is that when I was 19 years old, I actually went in and asked my boss for a raise.
Mm.
And I'll never forget, I took a year off between in college to work so I could pay for college. And I was making, I'm going to date myself, I was making $220 a week.
Nice. All
Big
right.
money, right? Working in a law firm. And I just was like, I should make more money. And so one day I got up the courage, which is one of the principles, right? You have to have courage, you have to be confident. And I went into one of the partners, which, lawyers, right? They're not that free with the money.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him that I thought I deserved a raise. And I gave him specific reasons why I thought I deserved that raise. And I said I wanted $240 a week. And he said yes. And I was like, oh my God, that was the hardest thing I ever had done. And then when I left his office, I was like, I should have asked for more money.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I agree. You could have went a little higher, I think.
Yeah, but it's about being confident. And I think he was really, I think he was impressed, well, this girl's got moxie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, and then it's interesting because I have a daughter in college and she wanted to ask for a raise and she asked for my advice and I gave it to her. And she went to her boss and asked for a raise and her boss gave her even more money than she asked for.
Wow.
And her boss said to her, I'm so glad you came to see me. It takes a lot of courage to ask for a raise and you deserve it.
So I'm curious about this is, I don't know if you addressed this in your book or not, but is there a way that maybe a CEO or a manager could kind of build the environment in a way that it might take less courage? Because what I'm getting at is I think a lot of employees, they're maybe afraid, they're afraid to ask, but it's also because that's the environment or the culture of that company, is it's kind of like fear. So do you address the other side of making it more comfortable for employees to be honest with you when things are?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I definitely talk about that in the book.
Okay.
I don't give advice. Listen, with the exception of this manager who actually is a pretty incredible leader, I've met her. I don't know of any boss that would be like, yeah, come on in, ask me for a raise,
True. Yeah.
But you're right. Making it comfortable for people to have uncomfortable conversations, which is what this book is all about. Because even though I might not come to you and tell you that I feel undervalued and that I feel like I should earn more money, eventually you're going to find that out when I leave.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't you rather somebody be comfortable and say, hey, I have some things that I'd like to talk to you about that aren't quite working for me right now. And can we talk?
And what about, so I won't name names here, but I know some people in very large corporations and they've shared with me, it seems like there's a lot of drama and talking behind people's backs and stuff in large corp. So in a coworker to coworker situation, and it's kind of going back to how I started the interview with that gray area, what is the best way to do that without crossing the line or so, and maybe it coming off as offensive and then that person could report you to HR? I just feel like it's almost there has to be a balance. You have to be so suit and tie, while at the same time, sometimes honesty is not so black and white. Like,
Well, yeah, and I don't think it's limited to large companies. I'm sure your
oh, for sure.
listeners
Yeah.
who work in small companies or nonprofits are like their heads are bobbing.
Yeah.
Um, the best way when you're having a conversation, when you want to have a conversation with a peer or even, a friend, is to begin with the words I feel, right? Because nobody can tell you that your feelings are wrong. No, you don't feel like that. No, really, I do. And you have, and then be specific. Like you saying to somebody, like, I feel like you're late to every single meeting. That person might be like, well, that's not true. And then you're like, well, I noted that in the last week, I was on a Zoom waiting for you to show up like, 3 times, and you came in 20 minutes late each time. And when you do that, that makes me less inclined to want to accept your next invite. So you have to kind of figure out what would influence that person to change their behavior and what's in it for them. And I give examples in the book on how to get to this place, as well as there's a ton of scripts in the book because I'm a script gal. If you give me a script, it gives me a starting place and then I can make it my own. But I find sometimes it's very challenging to start a conversation and not even know, like, where am I saying, where am I going, right?
Yeah, no, I like that's really useful. And as you were talking, I realized I do that a lot naturally with the feel thing. And it's kind of like a way of not to say of like one of my employees or like somebody does something that I think was incorrect or wrong. Instead of just being like, that was wrong. Why did you do that? I'm like, I feel like I would have done it this way. So I'm just curious, like, why did you do it this way or something? And it comes off like nicer. Like I'm not saying like, what the heck is your problem? But more so like, I just feel like it could have been done better, maybe, or something. And I haven't had any issues with it. So that definitely works.
Yeah.
So now, if I know one of the things you address, one of your main talking points is like how to say no to your boss, which I think that's a pretty big topic. So, can you share some scenarios or stories maybe of like how you would go about that? Maybe some real life examples. I don't know if you can use names or not, but
Well, I
yeah.
can't use names because if
Yeah,
you're my
yeah.
client, I wouldn't
Yeah.
name you, but I do have, I'm working with an executive right now whose boss, keeps piling on more and more work. And she is at this point overextended, right? And she's trying to keep her head out of the water and she's drowning. And so finally, we've had these conversations and she's ready to go into her boss and say, listen, if you want me to continue to keep the quality of the work up, which I'm assuming you do, I have to say no to this new assignment. I don't have capacity. I don't have staff. I don't have capacity. And so if you want me to take this on, then let's talk about what I need in terms of resources to do this. Because I think so many of us have just been saying yes, especially the last 18 months, right? Can you
Yeah.
do this? Yes. Can you do that? Yes. Because we're not even thinking, we're not thinking, well, if I say yes, then I'm not going to get home for dinner. Because guess what? Dinner's in the next room. So I can get to dinner and then I can work after dinner and then I can work after the kids are in bed. So
Mhm.
we've gotten ourselves into this place where we're taking on way more than what we can chew. And what's happening is you can see it in the numbers, right? You see the stress in the workplace is up dramatically and productivity is kind of, dipping down.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like, see, I've never worked corporate or really for anyone when I was younger, like little jobs, but when I was 19, I started my own company. So I had to learn at a young age like how to be productive while working at home or in my own office. And yeah, when you're at home, I can see how people, especially coming out of that corporate environment prior, they could end up just taking on a bunch of tasks and then working like all through the night or random hours. And it's kind of like they have no balance in it. It's just like, oh, I'll work when I can here and there. So it's like you have to, at least for me, for my sanity, what I had to do is like at this time, every day is different. But once I'm done, I turn it all off. Like I won't allow myself to check email at 9 p.m. Like it's just not acceptable to me because it's just too much brain. Like I need to dial down. But yeah, I could tell, and that's how it is when you go into a job, right? Like physically. But now these people are at home, so they're just like, yeah, I'll do that.
Well, I think we're seeing this more and more with women, right? And we see
Okay.
how many women have stepped out during the pandemic because not only, they stepped out of the workforce, not only were they responsible to keep up at work, but then all of a sudden somebody had to teach these kids, right, who were home in school, and somebody had to get dinner ready, and somebody had, and that somebody, a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times that somebody was a woman. And at some point, that person realized, I just can't do this all. Things are falling apart and I have to focus on what's most important to me.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I remember that when the pandemic started, I forget how long it was, but like kids were at home for a while from school.
Oh, yeah. Over a
Oh my
year.
gosh, it was over.
I had kids in college, and my daughter was like in her bedroom for 6 months until she then moved to her bedroom in Philadelphia
Oh wow,
for
really?
online college experience. And my son, he was in his bedroom in his apartment in Philadelphia. So I just said, thank you, Lord. Not if I had kids at home, I don't know if I could have written this book because
Yeah.
who's going to be taking care of them? Somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And just side note, because I'm curious, I grew up in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. So I don't, where are you guys from, Philadelphia?
No, our both of our kids are at Drexel.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. That, yeah, Doylestown's like an hour north of Philadelphia. So I
Yeah.
was there for a long time.
So they are, thank goodness their school just started again in person, but it's been crazy.
Definitely. Do they like it there though? They enjoy it?
I think so. They're in their senior year. So
Oh,
that's,
okay.
yeah,
Well,
gonna be
hopefully so.
fun.
If not, then the past couple of years have been not that fun.
Exactly. Hey, I don't care. I'm writing the checks.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not asking anyone if they're having fun.
Just get good grades. So I think, and it's like in our nature as people, we love stories. And it's one of the best ways that I've seen books do really well. And just the way that people share things, it's usually through storytelling. So
Yes.
I know it was on the description on your Amazon page that you have lessons learned in the book from conversation failures, and then from successes. So I'm curious, and obviously no names, but can you share to start some of the biggest like failures and what you learned from it, and then we'll obviously go to successes after.
Yeah. Well, the biggest failure actually happened to me. My boss said to me one day, I'm not sure. She said to me, you're not meeting my expectations, although I'm not sure I ever told you what they were. And so, right, I see your face. I had the
Yeah.
same reaction. And then I just sat back and I thought to myself, she went to Harvard. I went to Northeastern. We didn't get mind reading 101 there, but maybe at Harvard, it's an elite college. Maybe they took mind reading. I don't know. How on earth would I know what you would expect me to do if you never told me? Right.
Yeah.
And then, so what I realized in that moment, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I realized it when I was writing the book, is that I basically gave away my power. And I sat there like probably many of your listeners, and I just bobbed my head up and down, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I left. And that wasn't a good move. Like I should have said to her exactly what I said to you. Please explain to me how I would know what your expectations were if you never told me. And
Yeah.
then I should have just shut up. But I didn't do that. And I gave my power away. And that's one of the things I write about in the book, why it's so important when you're on the receiving end of one of these difficult conversations to not give your power away. And even if that means you say to someone, okay, I hear what you just said. I need some time to process this. Can we stop here? Can we meet again tomorrow at 9 a.m.? Because maybe, this person's been thinking about the conversation for months, more than maybe even years. And you just got the news and you need time, right, to think about it. And if you don't pause the conversation, you're going to probably walk out with the raw end of the deal.
Yeah, what's interesting, what came up for me as you were speaking there is that one of the worst feelings in the world is when somebody says something to you and they say it in a way that to them seems like clear and concise, but then to you, you don't get it. Like, and in email, for some reason that happens often. So I can't recall my exact responses, but let's just a handful of times I can think of. And my response typically is just like, I apologize if I'm like misunderstanding this, but can you elaborate? Like, because I'm not getting it. So, and that seems to work well, rather than just being like, you are speaking in very confusing language or something. Like, I don't get it.
I gotta tell you, my husband and I just got back from Italy, and we used a travel agent who I have a lot of respect for. And I got to tell you, with COVID and all the rules changing and everything, between the travel agent, the owner of the travel agency, myself, my husband, and a friend of mine who's an expert on grammar, we were all trying to figure out, like, were we required, if we were vaccinated, were we required to have a negative test before entering the country? Now, that was for Croatia, because we were in Croatia. And then we went to Italy. But anyways, nobody could figure it out. Like I said to my friend, this is how it's written. Does this sound to you like and, or if you don't have, like, the commas are here?
Yeah.
And people were saying to me, well, why don't you just get the test, just to be covered? And I'm like, I don't want that thing going, I don't want to go through that if I don't have to.
Definitely, yeah.
But it turns out, we didn't need the test. But the point is here you and I are talking about clear communication. And this is like, the government of Croatia. And nobody seems to understand, even specialists, what the heck they're saying.
Yeah, it is. I had a similar experience. I just went to Dubai for this event. And so I had to get a PCR test within 72 hours, but it's just not. You can look online all over the place. It doesn't like clearly say, because my question was like, well, okay, when do I present it? Because they say within 72 hours. And I'm like, well, there's a time zone change. And then is it within 72 hours from when I arrive or from when I get to this airport? Are you going to test me again when I
or when I depart? Because the flight is 12 hours, whatever, 15 hours, whatever.
15.
Like, yeah, very confusing. So
yeah, and I think it's preventing a lot of people from traveling. Like, because the worst case would be to like, at least this is what I thought, like as fun as Dubai was, like I live in Miami and like, I'd like to get back home and I didn't want to be stuck there or something. Right. So at the hotel there, I had to get another one to come back. And I just made sure, like, as soon as I actually landed and got into my room, I called them and was like, hey, I'm here for a week. And I want to schedule this right now to ensure I'm not here for 3 weeks. So,
I know. Well, it all comes down to, clear communication, right? And
yeah, it's not clear right now at all.
Yeah, nobody's being clear, which is why I wrote this book.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm going to send it to the, president of Croatia.
You should. They all need it, I think. Yeah. So what about on the flip side, like the biggest successes, like maybe somebody that you consulted that they wanted a raise and then they spoke to their boss with.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I have a story that's like brand new. I've been coaching a gentleman who works in the biotech industry. He has been in a senior director position for, a couple of years. He really wanted a VP role. And, I helped him with his language. And first of all, I helped him with his language, what he needed to do, how he should position himself to move into the executive suite. And within 2 months. Yeah, within 2 months. Last week he had 4 job offers. Um,
Oh,
4 job offers in 5 days, and they were all VP positions.
wow, that's awesome.
Oh, and then there was one offer he got that wasn't a VP position that he turned down. So it's
Yeah.
about the language, right? It's about how do you position yourself? How do you get clear? So number one, he was really, really clear. He wanted to be a VP. He was clear that he had the qualifications. And through our coaching work together, I was able to help him use, the right language and position him so that so he would get what he deserved. And he wasn't like me writing this book, right? I wasn't going to self-publish. He wasn't going to accept anything less. And
Yeah.
he was confident.
So actually, tell me if I'm wrong, but what I'm starting to realize now is one of the biggest pieces of your work or consulting is kind of, it's almost like helping people discover what they actually want. Because I think in the workplace, there's a lot of emotion when it comes to employee and boss relationship, like inevitably. So it can cloud logic. So with your consulting, like they might come to you and they're like, well, I want more money. And it's like, well, how much more? What is actually reasonable? And like, what do you actually want? Like more money, of course, like who doesn't? But like, so
Yeah.
I don't know, like, is that kind of what you do in a sense? Like actually help them get
Well,
clear first?
it's interesting because I work with organizations to help them attract and retain talent. I have this inside view of what it takes to get into an organization. So
Got
as
it.
a result of that, people have been hiring me privately to coach them. And, when I do job search coaching, I'm not a career coach. Like, I'm not going to help you figure out if you want to be a basket weaver or a plumber. Like, that's not me. But if you are looking to find your next opportunity and you know where you want to go and you need help getting there, then I will work with those people. But on the other side, I'm often called in by organizations to help with their executives who could really use some fine tuning in their leadership skills.
Mhm.
So that's really the majority of my work. But that comes down to when I'm with those people, it always comes down to their communication, right?
Yeah.
And many of them are avoiding difficult conversations. And then they are faced with having to tell their boss that their group is not getting the results that they should be. So a lot of the work, even though it's executive coaching, does come down to that communication piece.
Yeah, one of the biggest things is have you ever heard of Jordan Peterson? He's a psychologist author from Canada. One of the things that he kind of talks about is like you don't want to like avoid conflict because when you do, it's something that might be a little uncomfortable today if it's addressed. If you bury it and it grows more and more, and it could actually become like a real big problem like years down the
Oh,
road.
it always does.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Right.
think about couples that right? And you think, oh my gosh, they're like a great couple and they never argue, right? And then there's this big blow up and they're no longer together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I can relate to that. So that's good. It gets to the point where, like, if the spoon is in the fork lane, then it's a
That's
big.
it, we're done.
I'm done with that. It's like I can't take
I
it
know,
anymore.
and you're like all over the spoon. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
And then you start pulling out I feel like you're being a little picky. And
Yeah.
it goes downhill from there.
It does, because then the response is like, well, I feel like you could just put the spoon in the right lane, you know? So that's fun. So yeah, what I want to do now is I kind of want to give the floor to you, and if there's anything we didn't cover that you'd like to, the floor is yours. And then let people know where they can connect with you, the book, social media, website, and all that stuff.
Well, if I can leave your listeners with one message, it's time to start talking. Many of us have been very silent over the past 2 years, and we have just been trying to get through each day, right? And, we haven't really addressed the things that are on our mind. And so if you're listening today and there's a situation at work that you haven't dealt with, then I would encourage you to, download a copy of the book. It's called Can We Talk? 7 Principles for Managing Difficult Conversations at Work. I have a YouTube channel where I'm posting some very brief videos on difficult conversations. And maybe one of the topics I'm covering might be exactly what you need to cover. And then I can be reached at Roberta at Matuson, Matuson, consulting.com. Or if you'd like to connect on LinkedIn, send me an invite and mention this podcast so I know who you are. So I will say yes. Or if you need a speaker for your organization, I do that as well. And I would love to come in and talk.
Perfect. That's awesome. And thank you again for coming on the show. I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you.